Back to the product fundamentals. We're all here because we love startups and we want to create a company. We want to create value. And that's really important. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to build a useful product. There is this really nice quote, truly successful apps offer a clear solution to problems their users face. And as a product manager, you need to clearly understand what the issue is and why your product solves that issue. Being able to identify it as concisely as possible is incredibly important. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but first you observe a pattern. You observe something in the world that you want to be able to solve for. You want to be able to build an app that solves this problem or fixes a frustration or makes somebody happy in a way that they couldn't get happy before. There are tons of different use cases, but the overall idea is you see a problem, you see an opportunity, you've observed a pattern that happens over and over and over again, that an app can solve that problem. From that pattern, you develop your theory. You say, okay, I've observed this that's happened over and over and over, and I think that I can create an app that will solve it in this way, and by doing it in this way. So the hypothesis is, again, like we talked about yesterday, the application of your theory. It's the test. It's the initial, the MVP, if you will. You have an idea, and you need to test whether it's on par or not. And once you have the MVP, once you have this hypothesis identified, then you start measuring and learning in groups through A/B testing. You need to, as a product manager, always stay focused on the end goal, being able to identify the problem and always have that in mind through functionality, through the app that you're developing, through what you're trying to create. It should always get you closer to that end goal, that end pattern that you wanted to solve for, the problem. So the 4 product fundamentals that I've put together for this, we've gone through create a useful product. We've gone through what it takes to research and plan and design and build and how to iterate toward product market fit. And again, if you guys have questions about that, we can definitely dive back into it, or we can talk individually about it. Creating a smart product is the next aspect. And then after that, we'll do successful product, which are the loops, and profitable product, which are different strategies for business plan. We already went through that. Okay, so you want to create a smart product. You want to understand as a product manager that your app needs to do a specific purpose. It needs to do a specific thing and have a specific purpose. And in order to do that, there's key performance indicators, or KPIs. These are the things that are essential to being able to understand if your app or your product is doing what you want it to do. And we're going to go into the details of what a few example KPIs are and why they're important for mobile specifically. But the key thing to remember when you're thinking about KPIs is that they can be as intricate as you want them to be, but as a product manager, you're the one that identifies what those KPIs are. They are, like I said, they create the benchmark for how you understand if you're accomplishing your goal. But at Expedia, we have hundreds of analytics sets and indicators, but there are a few core things that really show us if we are accomplishing what we want, which is to get travelers the hotels and the flights that they want so they can travel and they can go on vacations. But again, so KPIs, they're only as intricate as you want. You could have 100 different indicators. You could have 2. That's all dependent on your product and your vision as a product manager. And they're only useful if you're diligent. You need to be able to look at them on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, whatever structure you have identified, you need to understand that if you don't look at that information, you won't understand it, and then you won't be able to learn from it. So being diligent about looking at that information, dissecting it, looking at the conversion funnel or the drop-off rate, understanding why people open your app and then bounce right afterward. Looking at all that information only makes you smarter. So you can make it as intricate as you want, but if you don't look at it as much as you can, then you won't understand and you won't have a chance to learn and change your roadmap and what you want to build in the future. And then this is all done through test and learn, obviously. So you need to validate your hypotheses and optimize. The test and learn process all ties back to the performance indicators that you identify, and you can break every step down, every step in the funnel. You can learn to optimize it in a way that will get you to that end goal in as quick a way as possible. When you're in the product validation aspect, it helps you really understand if your hypothesis is correct, if you are building the right thing. A lot of times when you launch a product or a new feature, you might think that it is solving a problem, but you might not really have it right. And having those indicators and having the test and learn process will really help you break it down and isolate it into specific steps. Okay, so if you want to create a smart product, I'd love some input from you guys on what you think a few KPIs would be for a basic app. Any app that you guys, any of your favorite apps, if you think about let's use Instagram for example. I'm sure most people are familiar with that. So if you think about what performance indicators Instagram would be most interested in, does anyone have any thoughts on that? Daily active users, yeah? Uploads per user, exactly. What's that? Stickiness, yeah, exactly. So, okay, so that touches on a few really good ideas. So there's lifetime value, and that is more correlated for any time a user is purchasing something. For Expedia, for example, lifetime value is really big, and it's difficult for us to calculate in some aspects, but being able to put a price tag on a user is hugely valuable when you have found product market fit and you're going to raise some money, for instance. You go to the potential investor, and they're going to want to know how valuable a customer is, and they'll want to know how much it costs to acquire that customer, and there'll be a bunch of other questions based off of that. You need to be able to answer those as quickly as possible. So retention rate is kind of the stickiness, how long or how many times a user comes back to your app. That's super important, and that depends very, very widely depending on what type of app you're building. Expedia, for instance, there's not really a need to go into Expedia every single day, but Instagram, for instance, you go into it multiple times a day, or once a day maybe. I go in multiple times, it's awesome. So it depends on, the stickiness depends on what type of app you've built, and as a product manager, being able to identify that idea and accordingly adjust your KPI to fit that is really important. Active users, average revenue per user if you're selling something, kind of related to the lifetime value. And the user happiness is a concept that it's kind of hard to put a figure on per se, but getting an idea of how many people are happy with the app that they're using. They're happy when they use your product. As a product manager, being able to understand if you're accomplishing the goal is really what it's all about. And you build your roadmap, you build your priorities based off of if you're accomplishing that goal or not. So talking to users, listening to their opinions on iTunes and on the Google Play Store, getting the star rating and getting the comments. Sometimes they're hilarious. Sometimes they're completely wrong. Sometimes they are completely right, and they help you understand how people are seeing a new functionality that you just rolled out or seeing the new product you just rolled out. That user happiness aspect, that helps with referrals. It helps with pretty much everything. If the user isn't happy, they're not going to keep using your app. None of these other things are going to be successful if they're not happy. So it's not exactly you don't get a finite number from it, but you can calculate a net promoter score, which would help you indicate that. Okay, so I used Expedia as an example. Let's talk about a few KPIs that we are interested in from our perspective. They're a little different. We are large scale. We are a global e-commerce app that allows you to book flights and hotels. So what do you guys think we would be interested in from the Expedia perspective? I went through a few of them before, but they might be a little different. What's that? Yeah, exactly. So average revenue is a big one, and here are the other ones. So how many installs we get is really important. Understanding what our efficiency is in marketing. As a product manager, being able to connect the dots between marketing and how much we spend in that and how many downloads we're actually getting. And that's essentially how you get efficiency. So that's all based off of installs. And you calculate that from iTunes and from Google. And I talked about AdX, which is an analytics platform that we integrate the SDK into our apps. That helps with attributing downloads through marketing channels. And that can be Facebook, that can be online, that can be email, anything really. So then we've got how many times a user launches an app. This helps calculate bounce rate. It calculates just how many times somebody is interested in the content that we're serving. And like I said, Expedia, we may not have a super high launch rate because we don't have content that's consumable on a daily basis. So we want to understand how many times a user launches it, but then that's the beginning of the user funnel, and the rest of it builds off of that. So hotel and flight search, those are the two lines of business that we have, and we need to understand how many times people are searching and what the parameters are. So being able to tie together, if everyone's searching for flight to San Francisco, so this left column or the right column is flights, and then the left column is hotels tonight that are near you. It uses the location of your phone. And being able to see if people are choosing flights more often or hotels more often is really important. And then that leads into the booking and the conversion funnel for each of those. And at a large scale conversion through the checkout process, a small 0.5 conversion percentage can have a multi-million-dollar impact. So when you're launching an app for the first time, the numbers might not be as high, but being able to break it down into that step process will help inform what priorities will be the most important as you're building your roadmap and as you're understanding what features are most valuable when you build the sprints. So Expedia, we also have the itineraries product, which is another piece that I manage. And the itineraries is any in-trip experience. So you've booked your flight, you've booked your hotel, and you might have booked a car as well. Being able to give real-time information on if the flight's delayed or when checkout is for your hotel. Being able to understand how people are engaging with the itineraries aspect, it helps me personally a lot. And this is another aspect that just ties into the greater vision of what the KPIs are for Expedia. And then we have engagement overall. How many times somebody performs a certain action in an app. We're very interested in that. If you're always opening the app and going straight to flights, or if you're always going straight into trips and the trips are empty, the itineraries, that might mean that the design is a little off. And it just gives little insights like that and helps you as a product manager, again, identify what is important, what assumptions are wrong, and what needs to be changed in the roadmap to more accurately reflect what you're trying to accomplish. So another way to think of KPIs is something referred to as startup metrics for pirates. This is interesting, but this is something that Dave McClure coined, and it's kind of R, but it's AARRR, and it's just another way to think of a few examples of indicators that are important for an app. Now, remember, these are examples. These are not built in stone or set in stone. Every app is different, and every app has different performance indicators. So keep this in mind and use this as a template, but it's only meant to be a template. It helps move the conversation, but if you have an app that doesn't specifically apply to these, then make sure that you don't try to force a KPI that doesn't really make sense for the app that you're looking to launch. So you've got acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. And now we've got this awesome diagram. Let's look at this. So break it up by, there's the acquisition stage, which is the top part in yellow. And this is how you get users into your app. It can be any sort of marketing channel, SEO, SEM, email, widgets. What else have we got? Affiliate, TV. Expedia spends a lot of money on TV advertising, which is a pretty unique approach now for tech companies, but it really helps with brand awareness. And you probably won't start out with TV advertisements or commercials, but SEO and SEM, PR, social networks is really, really strong. It's a great way to leverage marketing channels to start out, because you can get super targeted on Facebook, on Twitter, I think even on Pinterest now. You can target users based off of what regions they're in. But so Facebook, for instance, you can target the specific demographic of if somebody likes a certain band, and if they are in between a specific age range, and if they've gone to 1 or 2 or 3 different sets of colleges, universities. So that's the acquisition channel. It's how you get users into your app. Then you've got the activation channel, which is getting them from opening the app to actually becoming a user. There's the sign-up process. There is the sign-in process. Getting from the home page or the landing page into the specific products and the features is the next step. Then the third one is the retention. How do you get the user to keep coming back? And we'll talk about this a little more in depth, but there are ways to get them to increase their lifetime value by creating certain tasks for them to carry out in the app. Then we've got referral. How many people, when the user happiness is high, or you incentivize them, users will talk about your app. They'll share the information, and they'll get other people to join. So you've got ways to do that, whether it's through campaigns or contests. Expedia uses Instagram a lot, and their account. It's been pretty interesting to watch this happen. But being able to do sweepstakes or different sets of campaigns through the Instagram channel specifically can be really powerful, and anybody can use that. It's a social media network, and you can create a brand. You just create an account and start to build an identity, and then you can start doing sweepstakes and ask people to just hashtag or engage potential users, and it can all build off of that. So that's another way that's one form of referral. Then you've got emails and widgets. You can get the marketing campaigns out through email, and there are different widgets available that embedding into websites that Neil talked about before. All of those are referral tactics. And then the revenue aspect is something that we don't have any. As a product manager, you always need to understand that everything is driving toward that, and always keeping that in mind for when you think of functionality, when you think of what's most important. The end goal is to make money. The end goal is to solve a problem and connect a user to a solution in a certain way that will allow them to solve a pain point in their life. And by doing that, then you make money. And you can do, and there are different, okay, so now we're going to get into the actual profit aspects. But, okay, so we've talked about the beginning of the funnel, getting them through the funnel, how to optimize the checkout process or the conversion aspects. Creating a profitable product is the end goal as a product manager. You, like I just mentioned, you need to be able to sell something. You need to be able to make money to run a business. So in the mobile world, there are these are just a few examples, and they might not be, it's not all of the different types, but it's just a few that I thought of. But you've got paid apps. Gaming is a really good example of that, which gaming actually, you'll see gaming companies use data in a really, they drive revenue, they drive interactions, that drives everything. But you've got paid apps, which you just spend $1 or 99 cents or $2.99, depending on what the value is that you set for that app. And this is an interesting one because before you set the price, you need to talk to users. You need to talk to people that you think will use your app or that are using your app, and understand what price point they'll pay. If you set a game at $4.99 and the user values it at $1.99, then you're going to have to lower your price. So you're going to need to understand that you set the bar too high, so you'll have to change it. And you'll only understand that if you talk to the users, or if you set the price too high and then purchases plummet. That would be a pretty strong indicator that it's too high. And finding that price point as a startup is something that it's a really tricky process, but you can try out all of these different systems or all of these different ideas in your hypothesis, in your prototypes. It is worth mentioning that when you focus on the profitability, a lot of times mobile apps or social networks or newer startups, you can also focus on creating scale first and getting users on board as quickly as possible, and not focusing on the profit aspects initially. So that is something to keep in mind. And just because you don't charge for something at first doesn't mean that you don't have a plan in mind. So Instagram, for instance, there's no pricing, there's no cost to the user, but what they have started doing is rolling out the native advertising, and it took a few years for them to work that in because they wanted to hit scale first and get a ton of users and get that ubiquity in the market. So the second one is the in-app purchases. Again, gaming does this really well, but providing an app for free and then selling services for a certain cost that you buy within the app. I'm not a Farmville player, but I think you can buy specific crops or something, or corn, I don't know, but something like that. So in-app purchases, being able to provide premium content through a free app is an interesting strategy. It does, for iOS, for instance, when you do in-app purchasing, you need to keep in mind that Apple will take a specific revenue cut from in-app purchases. So there are upsides and downsides to each of these pricing models, and in-app purchasing, Apple does take a cut from that. Then there's the freemium, like pro tools like Dropbox. There's the free account, and then there's the paid account. Referral is a lot of niche networks use this. Being able to refer your friends and get a kickback. Again, Dropbox did a really good growth hacking strategy for referrals. Ad-based is more of an old school way to do it, but just serving ads. It's not as graceful on mobile. On websites, it's a little bit easier to do, and we actually do a lot of ad-based advertising on Expedia.com, but we don't do any on the native on our mobile apps. And there's a reason that we do that. We want to keep that experience as clean as we can and drive revenue from other streams. So being ad-based is very powerful, but you need to understand that there's a right time and a right place for it, and feeling that out. It's a slippery slope to start serving ads, especially on mobile, and just be aware of that if you're thinking of that as a strategy. And I mentioned native advertising earlier, but social networks have figured out a way to do this very nicely on mobile. Instagram is a good example of this that's starting to get rolled out, but then Twitter has been doing it for a while. Facebook does it a lot now on mobile. They didn't used to. They maybe started a year and a half ago, and it's become one of their biggest revenue drivers. But the native advertising, what that is it looks like the basic post from that app, but it's created by a brand. So a brand pays to have that content, that post show up in front of users or show up in front of specific users, and that allows them to target very specifically and then get the marketing as optimized as possible. So it's a win for them because they reach the users that they want to reach, and it's a win for you as a startup because it doesn't ruin the user experience of the app, and you also can actually start to profit off of advertising. Subscription is another one. A lot of pro tools use this. Adobe comes to mind first with Creative Cloud. So you have like a subscription-based, you pay annually or you pay monthly. Again, Dropbox is another example of this. You pay annual, or I pay annual. You might be able to pay monthly too. And then affiliate. So last click is something that retail may not uses, and anytime you have a large amount, I think Pinterest uses it too. Don't quote me on that though. But affiliate. So you pull in users, you provide information to them in a certain way, and then you send them to another site where they complete the purchase. There's a lot of clothing companies or a lot of shopping sites. So Pinterest, there's Supply. They'll pull in a bunch of information on shoes or clothes or jewelry, and then when you decide that you indicate that you want to buy, they'll send you to that to the site that you can actually purchase that. And being able to attribute, the company can essentially cookie you as a user. So always remember, if you do want to aggregate a bunch of information like Pinterest, there's a possibility of getting that last click, getting that cookie, and the downside to that is you need a large amount of users on your app to be able to actually get a profit from that. And then the last one is dynamic pricing. I think this one's super interesting, especially for mobile. If you think of the Ubers of the world or Airbnbs, Uber is a super good example of this. There's the surge pricing concept where, I think I was supposed to ask you guys if you knew of any companies. Anyway, yeah, there's surge pricing where when demand is really high, they increase the cost for the user. This is interesting because it's a downside for the user, but it incentivizes more drivers to sign in and start driving at that time because they make more profit. So this is specific to logistics companies, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in a little bit. But yeah, dynamic pricing is definitely becoming more common for mobile apps. Okay, so now you want to create a successful product. These 4 loops, as I think of them, aren't the only things that make up an app, but they're really good ways to think of functionality and what you want to lay out in terms of the roadmap, in terms of what the vision is for your app. So we'll just go through, but there's the data loop, there's the social loop, compulsion, and viral. And data is actually broken up into 2 different loops. Okay, so anytime you have a data loop, usage of your app results in more structured data being offered to the user in the end. So what that means is the more people use it, the more rich the content is, and the better the experience is for the user in the end. Foursquare comes to mind. Oh, yeah, so Foursquare comes to mind. When they first launched, it's all the venues were user-generated content, so there wasn't anything when they launched. And they let the users create the venues, add the data, add all the information. And now they did a redesign where not only do they have the venues, which they've gotten saturation in that, so I think they wanted to build more user-generated content. They get a lot of pictures, they've gotten all that check-in data, and now they're building a taste graph, which is a super interesting concept, where you can see that a user checks into specific places that if they like lattes or if they like croissants, you can understand that, and you can serve them venues or suggestions based off of the data that you've pulled together in the past. And it's all based off of user-generated content. So that data loop, the data loop in Foursquare is really strong, and they have a few built in now. A few other examples are Instagram. Anytime you create content, so Instagram, you create the photo. Facebook, you create the post. Twitter, you do that. You send the tweets, and you have the hashtags. All of these things allow the product to become more rich for the end user, and through doing that, they could also have an opportunity to get that native advertising built in. Waze is interesting, and I think that's really popular here as well. But it notifies, users notify other users when there are crashes or when I think you can do when there are cops nearby, when there's construction. I don't have a car, so I've never used it, but it's been really interesting to watch that come up and become such a powerful product. And the user retention, the stickiness of that app was so high. That's why it got purchased for such a high amount. And then Google is the huge example of this. The more you search, the more information they have, and the more relevant search results they can serve you. Okay, so now you've got the logistics loop, and this is a newer idea that has starting to get traction. But there's the peer-to-peer concept, the marketplaces. Okay, so I listed Uber. Does anyone else have any ideas on any examples on what a strong logistics loop app would be? Something like Uber. Okay, so I can go through the loops first and explain it a little bit. What's that? Yes, exactly. Okay, so with delivery apps or any type of transportation apps where you've got 2 sets, so the app delivers the user and it delivers the delivery person, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. So there are 2 different loops of data that they are serving at the same time that provide a beneficial experience on both sides. So on the user perspective, you've got first the user searches for Uber or for Postmates. They search, they say, hey, I'm a user and I need something right now, or I need a ride. And then you've got the engagement where the two different worlds actually connect, and they say, okay, are we going to approve this transaction between the 2 of us? Yes or no? So I'll keep using Uber as an example. You do the search, you say that I'm here and I'm ready for a ride, and then you hit yes, and that's when the engagement with the other loop comes in. And then you add the data, which gets fed back into the system, and that's what results in the dynamic pricing for Uber. they can understand how many users are asking for rides in a specific region, and they create that dynamic surge pricing based off of the request on how many people are riding at that moment. And then, so there's the enhancement, which ends up feeding back into the search loop. So the next user, once the surge pricing is triggered on the back end from other users, then when the next person searches, they see the surge pricing. Okay, so let's look at the second half of that loop, the drivers and the delivery people. So first they sign up, and they say they're available, so they need to say, okay, I am available for hire. And whether it's delivery or doing certain tasks or driving, it all starts with them activating their account and saying, okay, I'm ready to do something. Like, bring me, indicating to the app, like, bring me users. Then they accept the bid and exchange, and that's when it meets with the user side of it. And again, the more people are active, the more availability there is for the users, and then that feeds into that dynamic pricing, the dynamic pricing loop. So these are all really popular with logistics apps. I talked about Uber, a few other ones are Lyft, are Airbnb, Postmates, TaskRabbit. Fancy Hands is something where I've never used them specifically, but you can, in San Francisco, hire somebody to, I think, like, I don't know if it's cleaning your house, but like getting some sort of a service, like a delivery service for you. So it's a little different than Postmates, but it's a similar concept. And then there's Rinse, where you can have somebody pick up your clothes and do your laundry and then bring it back to you. So these are all really good examples of logistics loops where it's a peer-to-peer concept where one person is doing the service for another person, and the app uses data to drive that pricing model and drive and improve that process through every step of the way. So next we'll talk about the social loop. This is really interesting because every app, not every app, but most apps have a really good social component now. People crave interaction and they want feedback. They want to not be siloed anymore. When apps and when websites were first getting started, every user was just built into a silo, and they didn't have a way to connect to anyone else. And that experience is lonely. It's lonely online. And being able to tie different silos together in really strategic ways can be hugely, hugely important when you are thinking about what type of product you want to build and how that happens. So the social loop, there's the discovery aspect. Let's use Facebook, for example. So you've got your news feed, and they serve you the information. Now they filter it, they weight it based off of past interactions, and that's actually a social loop too, because they take what you are looking at, and then they look at how you interact with it, and then they serve you information, or they serve you more content that's relevant to you. So you got search, then you've got the engagement and the interaction, and then the sharing component. So when you share, you can, with social loops, one thing that people talk about a lot is your viral component. That essentially is indicating how frequently I, as a user, feel the need to bring somebody else on as a user. So it results in organic downloads, which is, it's free for you. So as a product manager, a free user is the best kind of user. For a few reasons. One, it doesn't cost anything, but also that means that the user happiness is high enough that they felt the need to bring somebody else on board and tell somebody else about your app. And that that evangelism is exactly, it's the best way to grow. It's how you achieve hockey stick growth, as they call it, but exponential growth, where your share rate is higher than your engagement rate, or your new user rate is higher than your engagement rate. Okay, like I said, users crave interactions. Enable them. You let your app, as you're thinking about different elements of functionality, let them interact with each other. Expedia is an interesting example in that we don't do that fully right now, but we are starting to do that in specific ways. But with any sort of app, you have your module of data, whatever type of information you want to display. You could think of it as a box, and you fill that box with anything, whatever that app should do, that main form of content. You've got your primary interactions, which are the first things that you want the people to be able to engage that content, whether it's reading or clicking or anything. And then now you've got these little micro interactions, which are really cool. They take only a second, but it gives that feedback loop. It gives that immediate feedback loop. It's a much tighter way to get that feedback from user A to user B. A good example of that is the double tap heart in Instagram, or the like button in Facebook. I think that was the first one probably that did it. Now, I mean, it's pretty much in any type of social app. Then there's sharing, being able to grab that primary piece of content and send it to another user, whether they're in the app or not. That's where I'm getting into the viral component. Being able to comment on the information too. I'm a user and I send it to you, and then you want to comment. YouTube has amazing comments. Even Amazon, the comments in that are amazing. It's the best way to validate if a product is right for you, is through the commenting process. People love to give feedback on things, and the more you enable that, the more interactions and the more engagement users will have. So that gets back to the stickiness. The more sticky the app is, the more they interact with it, the more options you give them for interaction, the more they will engage with your app if you do it properly. Then there's tagging, which is, I think it was kind of started, or it took off with Facebook, and now you can do it on Instagram. You can even do it on Twitter now, I saw. You can tag users in pictures, which is really cool. But being able to, again, just pull various users into someone else's activity is just so powerful. And it all gets back to the idea of each person not being a silo. You have the ability to create a social network and tie people together in as many ways as you want. So as a product manager, being able to think of the most relevant way to tie different users together can be super powerful. Airbnb is a good example for pulling in your social graph and showing what friends have stayed or commented in apartments that you're looking at. So I have a friend that I randomly was looking at places in Hawaii, and a friend of mine that lives in Sweden, I saw her picture on a random hosting in Hawaii, which it was a beautiful tying together of that social data in a way that I never would have known to ask her if she had ever stayed in a place in Hawaii, because she lives in Sweden. Why would that have ever happened? But before you know it, Airbnb tied that information together for me in a really nice way. Okay, so the third one is compulsion. And this is a good one. So this is being able to create a product that builds a habit that makes users want to engage in your product more. It overlaps a little bit with social loops, but I think of it as a different thing. Okay, so compulsion kind of brings in two chemical reactions that apps can trigger. There's the dopamine and the endorphin. Dopamine is really interesting because it comes when you have this anticipation. It's like the adrenaline rush that you get. It's a very small dose of it, but an adrenaline rush, if you think about jumping out of a plane or I don't know, riding in a really fast car and a motorcycle, you get this rush. It's hard to replicate, and apps can create that same chemical in really, really small quantities, but you still feel it. You still feel this. It creates this biological response that enforces engagement and helps create this habit. And then the endorphin is that happiness that you feel. Games do a really good job of utilizing this. But when you accomplish a task, you get this feeling, this happiness. So there are more that can be tied into compulsion, but I'd like to focus on these two. So compulsion loop. Let's go through the loop real quick. You've got first the trigger, then the action. So the trigger is, and I'll go into this in depth in a second, but trigger, action, the reward, which can be variable or it doesn't have to be. Most effective ones are though, but they need to make sense for the app that you're creating. And then the commitment. You've got once you get the reward, then you've been able to get the user committed. They feel that they've gotten an investment in that app or in that habit that you're enforcing. So here's where the chemicals come in. So you get the trigger, and then all of a sudden you start thinking about the action, and before you can take the action, you get really excited. Or you start thinking about the reward before you take the action. And if it's a variable reward, you're like, all right, am I going to get it? Am I not going to get it? Okay, I'm super excited. I got to figure this out. So then you perform the action, and then you get that reward and that satisfaction of getting the reward. And then you get another bump of dopamine, whether or not if it's variable, you might not get it. And then you've gotten the investment, you've gotten that commitment, which feeds back into the trigger. So the more you enforce this behavior, the more people want to carry out this behavior in the future. So Instagram, I'm going to keep using this because they've just gotten so many things right. So Instagram, you post a picture, and you think it's a really nice picture. And you're like, all right, this is going to get 50, 100 likes. This is going to be awesome. So you're sitting there and you've got this anticipation and you post it and then you're just waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and then the first like comes in. You're like, all right, that's sweet. Second like comes in. Okay, this is going well. Like. And then all of a sudden you open the app and you've got 100 likes or you've got 50 likes and you've got this feeling of it's kind of like pride. You feel good, that reward. You're like, all right, I got that social validation. I feel really good about myself. So what happens? You post something, people like it, you want to post more. You want to get that feeling again and again and again and again. And so you asked about the variable reward. Instagram is a really good example of that, where Instagram is a good example of variable because you don't know if people are going to like it or not. Same goes with Facebook. You could put a post up, and you're never sure if people are going to interact with it or not. So social, the social element is kind of an inherent variable reward system, where you get the validation or you don't, and the more validation you get, the better you feel, because it is that compulsion loop. Okay, so let's talk about the triggers. This is a really interesting part for me. I've been thinking about one specific aspect for Expedia, specifically, but ways to trigger and kick off this loop, this compulsion, this habit, whether it's a post or whatever sort of action you want to identify as the driving mechanism as a product manager, being able to start it off in some way. And these are just a few examples, but you can start it off with push notifications. You can start it off with emails. In-app messaging is a good example. Local notifications are a similar idea to push notifications, but a little different. They don't come from the server. There's a new aspect, which is iBeacon. If you can use Bluetooth Low Energy to use geofencing or get information on where the user is, if they're in a specific building, if they're in a specific location, trigger some sort of notification to kick off this, this behavior that you're trying to enforce. I think iBeacons are really, really interesting because they're so new. You can, if you have any sort of offline commerce technology, if you want to build an app that if you're in the mall, for instance, you could use iBeacon technology to understand where you are and then send messages that are specific to you and help you enforce some sort of thing that you want to try to accomplish in the app, whether it's going and redeeming a coupon or going in and buying a item of clothing or something. So in Expedia, I've been thinking about this a lot on the engagement aspect and trying to pull in more compulsion loops into Expedia. Right now, we have 21 types of push notifications that you can get as a user, which is a lot, but you don't get them all at once. They're all contextual. So if you have a flight cancellation, if you have a delay for a flight, if you've imported someone's itinerary and it's a flight, you get a push notification when their plane takes off and when it lands. You also get reservations. So there are a ton of different use cases for those 21 notifications, and you don't want to bombard the user. You need to be really careful as a product manager. And this is a little bit of marketing too, but push notifications are super powerful. They're a really good way to engage the user that is not possible in websites. You can use you can send something from a server, some sort of trigger, and pull a user into your app when they're not engaged with you. And that wasn't really possible before push notifications in this way. And now iBeacon lets you do that even more hyper-focused. You can use geolocation. You can use all these different aspects that your phone doesn't need to be listening for. As long as your Bluetooth is on and you walk by something, you can use different logic to build whatever type of notification you want in your app. So iBeacon can be super powerful, and it's just at the beginning stages. It's a really new aspect, at least in the iOS side. I know Bluetooth has been in the phones, and it's been available in Android for a while. And then there's the geofencing. If a user walks into a certain location or walks out of a certain location, you can use that information to trigger that, begin the compulsion loop and help them carry out a specific action. A good example of this would be Foursquare. When you walk near a venue, when they're fairly certain that you're within that spot, they send you a notification using geofencing that says, hey, are you in this spot? You should check in. And also, we know that you like croissants, so you should get a croissant because there are a lot of tips on the croissants in this place, or coffee or milkshakes. So the trigger it's the beginning of the funnel, and there are a ton of different ways to do it. You can also do emailing. That's a pretty established way to do it. But you have to get users to start the loop somehow. And the trigger is a super important aspect of that. Okay, so we've talked about what the compulsion loop is, and I've given examples of Instagram. Does anyone have any other ideas on what has a really strong compulsion loop in a mobile app? So we talked about the social validation as an example. What are your favorite social networking apps? Pinterest. Okay, exactly. Yeah. So you get You get a notification when someone repins, or you get a notification when someone follows you or saves your board. That's all the beginning of a compulsion loop because it gives you that positive social validation. Other examples are Facebook and Twitter. And then you get into the gaming world, which the gaming world is all about endorphins and all about the compulsion loop because they just keep driving. And Zynga uses, like I said before, they use data. They understand what drives you as a user at the most minute level because they optimize it as much as possible because they want to make as much money as they can in a really short amount of time. Yeah. I'm sorry? Would eBay be considered as a compulsion? That's a good question. So in that instance, the user has already started an auction, and you want to be able to hook them back in. You do want to tie it back together. What the compulsion aspect would be, once the auction has ended, how do you get them to start another auction or bid on another auction? So keeping people engaged is one aspect of it, but the other one is getting them back in and performing that action. So eBay, for example, you want, as a product manager, you want somebody to create auctions and bid on auctions. And you want to enable that as much as possible. So the compulsion loop would be, how do you reinforce that habit of bidding? Or how do you reinforce that habit of selling whatever you want and creating an auction online? So yeah, yes and no-ish. Yeah, so Zynga Games, Candy Crush, I don't play it personally, Farmville, anything like that, but it ties into the compulsion loop really, really strongly because they understand that. So I was reading about Farmville, and if you plant something, you need to harvest it at a certain time, and to be able to harvest it, you need to go back into the app, so they'll send you a push notification so you don't let your farm, like your crop of corn, die at a certain time, because if you don't harvest it, then it'll be a lost investment. So Farmville just keeps enforcing the habit of opening the app and engaging in it and planting things and keeping everything going. Okay, so the last loop is the viral loop, where you discover, you engage, you interact, and you share. It ties into the viral coefficient, how easily your app brings on other users naturally, organically. So each user is sharing to another. So the way that you want to do that is you need to define your consumable content. You need to make it interactive and social, which we talked about with the interactions, the micro interactions, the commenting, the sharing, the mentioning of other users, making it as not understanding that information doesn't need to be siloed, and strategically making those connections between users. Then you need to make the user want to share. So that's the hook. You need to understand that people are inclined to be social, but they're not going to do it if there's no reason to. So Neil talked about this morning, like putting the widget on people's homepage, or putting his name on people's homepage. If there's no reason for people to do it, they're not going to do it. Or if there's no incentive for them to do it, they're not going to perform an action. So you need to create that hook. You need to create that reason, and you can make that be an emotional, like an internal hook, or you can make it be an external hook. So you could game it if you want, where you get like more points, or you could make it be, if the content is really emotional, like super happy, and it's YouTube is a really good example. So if you have a YouTube video of the cutest dog you've ever seen that's trying to talk like a human, and you watch it and you're like, oh my God, I need to share this. This is amazing. I'll send it to 5 different people that I know will really like it. So that emotional internal hook is a good example is one way to do it. So then there's the speed. You need to make it as easy as possible to share your content and onboard new users. So that acquisition funnel is really key. And if it's it all, as you're laying out your product strategy, deciding when people need to sign in or when people would need to sign up if they're not an existing user. You don't necessarily want to do it at in the front of the app because you'll scare people away. If they don't know what they're signing in or signing up for, they're not going to do it because, again, they're not incentivized. The value that you haven't demonstrated value to them, and you can do that in a few ways. You can just lay it out in like a new user onboarding, like educational slideshow or a video. Another way to do it is just to bake it in later in the experience, where if you want to perform a certain action, you might get a prompt that says, oh, you want to reshare this? But first you need to log in so we know that it's you that is resharing it, so then we can attribute it later. But you always need to be focused on demonstrating the value and conveying that to the user as quickly and as concisely as possible, whether it's through the onboarding or through messaging later in the app. Understanding that in order to make a viral loop, people need to be able to sign up and use your app really, really quickly. Okay, mobile first. I've been talking about mobile apps pretty much this whole time, and a lot of people might wonder, like, why should I build on mobile? What are the benefits? What are the pros? What are the cons? As an early startup, it's always a difficult decision to go mobile first or not. And there are ways to get around certain aspects of it, but using responsive web is really, it's a great way to find market fit and do different tests and get different validations for new functionality or entire apps. Make sure that your hypothesis is on par or you're targeting the right user. But there are certain things that responsive web can't do. So the pros of using mobile first, which would be native in this instance, are push notifications. You can't do a push notification on a responsive website. It's just, technically, it's not possible. So a push notification at the technical level is an extension of an app. It's an extension of that native app of iOS. Android has something similar. It's a little different, but the concept is there. So being able to send push notifications and start that trigger is a great way to engage users. And again, you need to be super careful on how you do it, because if you burn people out, they'll turn off push, or worse, they'll just delete your app, because it's easier to delete your app than turn push off. So push notifications, you've got in your phone, and responsive web can use this too, but your phone has so many sensors, it's amazing. You've got your compass, you've got your accelerometer, you've got the new phones have like specific motion chips in them. You've got the coordinates, your geolocation, which can infer what zip code you're in, what state you're in, what country you're in, which helps with checkout process and auto-filling zip code or locale or anything like that. Or for Uber, for instance, you never need to put your location because you use your phone's geolocation. There are performance pros where being able to cache content and enable a faster user experience or load content faster, that just helps the experience overall. And then OS level integration, being able to tie into certain functionality at the base layer of the phone can be really nice, and push notifications is an example of that, actually. So there are these are pros of using native apps, and also a few components for responsive web. Responsive web is great you don't need to go through an approval process. Okay, so the cons are cost of developing for a native. A lot of times it requires a more specific knowledge set for a developer. iOS is Objective-C, and Android is Java. And with responsive web, you can use HTML5 and CSS. You can use JavaScript. You could use Flash on Android, I think, maybe, if you really wanted to. So there are a ton of different ways to test these different hypotheses that some might be cheaper than the other. Just cheaper in terms of spending time developing, essentially, opportunity cost. And then there's the approval process that I just mentioned. With iOS, you need, every time you want to release a new app, you need to submit it to the App Store. And you need to go through this gatekeeper of Apple, of the iTunes entity of Apple. There are very specific guidelines on what your app can and can't do. And so when I was a consultant, this was probably 2 years ago, I was working with a company. It was a nonprofit that wanted to build a native app, an iOS app for raising money for people that were adopting children. And one of the main use case for the app was you're out in a social setting and you're trying to adopt this kid. In the US at least, I'm not sure what the cost would be here, but in the US it can cost somewhere around $40,000 to adopt a child. And they wanted to kind of crowdsource that cost as much as possible. Long story short, you can't raise money, you can't raise funds in a mobile app because it's against iOS, it's against iTunes terms and conditions. So the product fit was perfect, it was for a good cause, everything was built under regulation and within guidelines, and in the end, we couldn't launch the app that we had built and I had been brought on to design and manage because the gatekeeper of iTunes, it was outside of the guidelines. And there are a few reasons for that. There are liability concerns. So there are benefits to having this gatekeeper. It helps with fraud. It helps with a bunch of different things, just keeping the ecosystem clean. But also there's a downside, which in the adoption example, you just couldn't do it because it creates too much liability for iTunes. So the approval process, there's the speed to launch is tied to the approval process essentially, but you can do an A/B testing or a cohort test with a responsive website, and it can be live immediately. And Google, you can also have it be live immediately too. There's no approval process. But that cohort testing with responsive web, always keep in mind that if you are testing something and you need to keep it lightweight, responsive web is probably the best way to go for market validation, for any type of validation at the very beginning. And even just creating quick prototypes. As a consultant or as a startup, being able to convey what you're trying to accomplish in a really bare bones way. That MVP, even before an MVP, you create a prototype that you just demo to people, whether it's VC or an angel investor or potential clients. Being able to show potential clients or potential customers what you are interested in building can get you that essential feedback that you need as a product manager to understand if you're building the right thing and if you're on the right track. So speed to launch, cohort testing are huge. Okay, phases of the internet. So this is what patterns we have seen at the application layer of the internet. So we've gone through infrastructure, and now we're in application phase. First we had the all-in-one portals. AOL is a good example of this. You had your email, you had your browser, you had your chat rooms. Everything was baked into one thing, and it was all web-based. Everybody loved it for a while, and then the new things kept getting added, and then it got super cluttered. And then you saw that other people started to break that functionality off. And using AOL as an example, so they created their AIM client, which they kind of stumbled into a specific use case app in a really early phase of it, and they were able to ride that in the very beginning. But then there was social networking. Facebook is the obvious example for this. So being able to understand that users aren't silos of data anymore. They want to be connected. They want that interaction. They want to be able to share. And they want to be able to see that I am a person and you are a person, and I can engage with you online just like I do offline. So with the social networking, again, these companies started to put more and more functionality in. And what used to be a really good way for people to connect got a little cluttered. Things got noisy. So you got this opportunity to create these niche social networks where you've got, if anyone is into running or biking, there's an app called Strava which tracks your activity, your runs. You've got Runkeeper, Fitbit, for instance. You've got all these little networks. GitHub is a really good direct example. It's a social network that is specific for developing code and building apps. It's a really specific use case. Pinterest is another one. So everything is very focused, and it allows you to target specific types of people and give them functionality that you wouldn't otherwise be able to justify building as a product manager. Like Facebook, for instance, if you were a PM at Facebook, it would be really difficult to justify being able, like, tracking your run on Facebook. It doesn't really make sense. But when you break it off and you say, all right, I'm going to create a mobile app that tracks runs that other runners can watch and see what trails people go on or what biking path people take. Like, that's when it starts to make sense. So those niche specialty networks were a natural byproduct of the bigger social networks. And then the same thing happened with mobile and with from desktop. You had all these apps that were doing all these different things, and it started to get cluttered, and the more you added, the more confusing it got. And it didn't really fit the use case of the phone. The phone is direct. It's more transactional. It's a shorter attention span. So then entrepreneurs started understanding that, and then you got things like the Yo app or the Snapchat app, where you can create content in one tap. And you could be, like with Snapchat, for instance, it can be a video, it can be an image, and it's so simple to post that content that it just blew everything else out of the water. And before you knew it, Snapchat had a huge adoption rate all over the world because it was a different way to share media. And it had a really unique set of constraints too, where people just found it really interesting. So social use apps, again, Instagram is a really good example of that. It's for uploading images, uploading beautiful images as quickly as possible. So when you're thinking about mobile app design and mobile strategy, you want to understand that you're trying to solve a problem for a user. And if you are on a phone, you want it to be as fast as possible. You want it to be as few clicks as possible, because it gets the user from the desire to do something into the reward of doing something very, very quickly. Okay, so now let's talk about a few patterns. Focusing on mobile still, but I talked about it a little bit before, but single-purpose apps, you see the Instagram, you see the Snapchat, you see Twitter. Now, Twitter is a little bit of a mixture of both, but it was built around the constraints of 140 characters. It was inherently built to work on your phone, and then they adopted desktop after that. But the Twitter use case is a great example of mobile first. You've got the fast content creation. It takes 1, 2, 3 taps, just a few seconds, and you get from the desire to the result almost immediately. You've got consumable content. Whatever that is, whatever you want your app to be, as long as it's solving a need, it can be that thing. It can accomplish what you want it to do. It can house any data that you want. I mentioned Yo before. It's a really interesting use case because it really doesn't do much. You get a push notification and that's it. It has 3 characters, and then it's done. So arguably, like, does that solve an issue? Does that solve a problem? Maybe. And I think there might be an attempt to spin that into an enterprise version. But the point is, it creates that interaction and tying one person to another person in one tap. And does it solve a use case? It could, it couldn't, but it's challenging the concept of what an app should be, which is, I think, very valuable from the entrepreneur perspective, from a startup perspective, being able to challenge the norms and being able to be different because you think it accomplishes something in a way that other people don't, or it's solving a problem that other people might not necessarily see. That's a good conversation to be having. So always think about challenging the assumptions, the existing patterns. Everything I list here, you might think, okay, I'm going to blow all that away. I don't really care about it. I'm going to do something different. That's totally fine. But understand, like, these are the common things that people understand right now. And if you want that quick adoption, then you might want to think about creating a strategy around 1 or 2 of these concepts. Okay, so you've got consumable content, really fast creation. You've got the primary interactions, then the micro interactions. So whether it's a like or a double tap for a heart or a reshare, whatever. Then there's this semblance of synchronous and asynchronous communication. A lot of apps, the beauty of them are that they can be asynchronous. Both people don't need to be engaged in order to derive value. Synchronous, an example of synchronous would be like a phone. I use my phone the least I use it more than the compass on my phone, on my iPhone, but that's pretty much it. I don't like talking on the phone. Being able to connect to people is really useful in some very specific circumstances for me, but asynchronous communication is really the way that I prefer to interact, whether it's text messaging or I use Instagram. Email is the classic example of asynchronous. You've got person 1 doing the transmission and creating the content, and then person 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever reading the content and then replying when they want. So then you've got this idea of a follow model. So this is kind of specific to any app that you would want to create that has a semblance of a social network. You've got asymmetric and symmetric. And Facebook started out as the symmetric. You had to approve for someone to be your friend. So someone would ask, and then you would approve, and then that connection was both ways. And then Twitter had the asynchronous follow model, which is I just want to follow you. I want to watch what you're doing, and you don't. And there are controls to approve following and not, and I think those are valuable. But the concept of just watching other people, it allows social networks to create those connections, connections between users at a faster rate than synchronous. So I think that's why Facebook, for instance, started to adopt, there's the add friend button and then there's the follow button. Being able to still tie those users together, I think they realized that, and they took learnings from Twitter and adopted them into their product as well. So being able to reach critical mass before you try to apply a profit strategy, it's not necessarily required, but that's how a lot of startups, a lot of companies get users at first. You give the value to them, and then first you provide the value, and then you derive the value later. Once you understand how people want to use your app, what problem you're solving, and being able to figure out a pricing strategy off of that. But being able to reach critical mass is something that all of the popular apps reached critical mass. They're reaching mass faster and faster because they're hitting a global audience more effectively and more immediately than ever before. It's crazy to see apps that go. So we at Expedia, anytime you get featuring in the iTunes store, we see a like a huge jump in downloads, and that's just getting your name out there as fast as possible and getting those downloads and the people opening your app. It's huge, and now you can get a worldwide audience instantly. And if you have good sharing components and good viral components and a strong compulsion loop, it can go from 0 users to 100,000 users in a day. And it's crazy. So the opportunity there, and it's just more and more people are engaged and connected on new phones, and the deeper the penetration rate is for mobile devices, the more and more opportunity there's going to be worldwide. Which touches on the next topic, the global appeal. You being able to build, as a product manager, being able to understand that you have a problem that you are trying to build an app for or build a solution for. If you can tap into as many people as possible, it's so much more valuable being able to reach a mass audience. And it seems kind of obvious to say it like that. Like, yeah, of course you want as many people using your app as possible. But you need to be thinking about it from the very beginning. What is the use case that you're solving for? And you as a product manager, what is your strategy to engage as many people or make that product appealing to as many people as possible? Okay, so we've got fast loading. I think we talked enough about that. Define constraints, unique in some way. Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, all of these things had really unique ways of providing a set of data from user to user that hadn't really been done before. 140 characters, square images with beautiful filters. Snapchat is like the temporary. It's like the ethereal concept. All of those things give users a different way to interact and to use your app, and that can be super powerful. Okay, so these are the patterns. There's a lot here, and we can talk about any of these more in depth down the road. But now let's go into what we can consider like mega trends. So what's happened? Wow, that's slow. Let's see. Boom, boom, boom. Transitions aren't that smart when you're actually in your presentation. No. Okay, so what's happened already? You've got the social mega trend, huge boom in being able to connect those silos. You've got the cloud trend, and being able to move all of your back end, all of your infrastructure from physical servers into the cloud is amazing. And that touches on being able to scale and being able to hit that global audience as quickly and as fast as possible. If you do create an app that gets a lot of attention and gets 100,000 downloads in the first week, that's amazing. But you need to be able to scale to that. You need to be able to support all of those new users in a way that that's smooth. You can't experience downtime. So the cloud movement is huge. Then there's the mobile aspect, global, the logistics loop, that peer-to-peer concept. Airbnb has done a great job of, Airbnb and Uber, there are a lot of legal implications and like for taxation and insurance and liability, things like that, but it's created this completely new concept of economy that I own this one thing and I want other people to be able to use it and rent it from me, or I have the ability to deliver something to people, or I can drive people around. I want other people to be able to use my car. All of these things weren't possible before, and a lot of them are mobile first now, which is awesome. So the peer-to-peer and the sharing economy. Okay, so we've seen what's happened now. Like, you've got cross-device experience. The devices that people are using, they started out with just computer, and now they're breaking up. They're fragmenting into all these different worlds where right now you've got phone, but now you've got tablet. First, it took a long time for tablet to come, and everybody knew it was coming. Everybody saw it coming, but there were concepts that they weren't really working yet, and then iPad came out and kind of changed everything, as they always do. So cross-device experience, from a mobile perspective, it's not thinking of mobile as phone, it's thinking of mobile as anything that you can take with you, anything that is non-desktop. That maybe that's a better way to put it. It's not tied to a power device. So you've got wearable technology, you've got rings and watches and Fitbits, tracking data, tracking heartbeat, tracking perspiration, tracking elevation, tracking activity, everything. There's so many opportunities for cross-device. And for Expedia, we actually are in an interesting position. I got it. So we're in an interesting position at Expedia where the travel industry reached this cross-device world a lot earlier than a lot of other verticals did. So I've been thinking about that a lot at Expedia and in the mobile world. So what does that mean for travel? You might not want to book a $4,000 or $2,000 vacation on your phone. And when an Expedia app comes, or Expedia Watch, or we have a Samsung Watch app out, there's no way that you would want to book a package for that much on your watch. It just doesn't make sense. But the opportunity is tying those concepts, tying that user stream and that user experience together across device is really, really cool. And it's an interesting data problem that you need to be aware of and be able to design around as a product manager. Like, understand that people will go from phone to tablet to computer to watch to ring to whatever. It doesn't matter, to computer or to car. All of that information can be tied together in your product in a seamless way that makes your company even more powerful than it could have been if it were just housed in a phone or in a computer, for instance. So Internet of Things, there's like the wearable concept. Things are becoming more connected, whether it's your light bulbs or your thermometer at home. Being able to understand that the world around you is becoming more informed, and you can build logic around that information. You can build products around that information. iBeacons, Bluetooth, all of those, like being able to ping new information and updates. We have buoys in the middle of the ocean that tweet information to across Twitter that other bots pick up. You know, you can build all of these beautiful products around all these cross-device, all these Internet of Things. You can with Nest, you could build a product that understands that you're in your car and your GPS is moving, and then you hit a geofence that your app has created, and when you cross that geofence, your house starts to warm up or your lights turn on, and then when you get to your front door, you might have your internet-enabled lock that uses Bluetooth and proximity to. There are different zones in like Beacon and Bluetooth. You could use like the zone 0, so it's a few centimeters away. You bring your phone up, and then your door unlocks. Or you leave it in your purse and you leave it, or your pocket, and it can be zone 3. Or you could pass identity access to somebody that's visiting for the weekend. So when they get to the front door, your lock can recognize their phone and then unlock and have like weekend access. It's like so many options. And then there's Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and being able to track payment perfectly across a completely fragmented, so that you have the blockchain, and being able to have a perfect ledger as as fractional as needed, and then rebuild it on the other end, at the end, on the other side of that transaction. I think that that's going to be a really interesting space. Wearables we talked a lot about already. So discovery. So we talked about push notifications and being able to start that user funnel, start that action as early as possible. Rather than letting the user come to you, you go to the user and you pull them in. So pull to push is that idea. Being able to go to the user rather than letting them come to you and needing them to tell you what they want. You can use data, use understanding of what they are or who they are, and serve that data to them in contextual ways. So those are like what I think of as the most interesting opportunities. Obviously, you guys don't need to be doing any of this. You could think I'm full of crap, or you could ask more questions.
For wearable devices,
Yep.
how do you create the compulsion loop?
Compulsion loop for wearable devices. That's a good idea. Good question. So all of the 4 components would still be there. The trigger is a little different because, well, so the device obviously is inherently different. Depending on if there's a screen or not, what type of wearable. Do you have one in mind that you're wondering about? What's that? Personal data logging, like a Fitbit or something? Okay, so personal data logging. If there is a screen, so it depends on if there's a UI for that, like what the UI is. If it's a interesting example would be a ring. Adding a compulsion loop for a ring would be a vibration or a light or some way to trigger to start that loop in a way that would be inherent to that device. So a ring, like a light or a vibration or some sort of indication that there is activity to be done somewhere else. With wearables, I think that it ties into, you need to remember that the experience might start with a wearable, but it might not end at the wearable. So if you are doing some sort of tracking, you might start the compulsion loop on your watch and then go from your watch to your phone, to your computer, or to your car or something. So yes, the compulsion loop, the trigger would be different depending on what the form factor is of the device. And you should understand the form factor before you decide. You just need to make sure it makes sense.
Hi.
Hey.
Just wondering if you would be able to share more about how Expedia expanded globally. Like, what informed your choices of which countries to go into, and how do you expand there? Like, how do you actually hire the people there, or the legal side of it, and how do you do your marketing? And were you forced to adapt certain things to that country? Right. Thank you.
Yeah, so the adaptation is the easiest thing to answer. Absolutely. The regions have, every type of user in different regions have different desires, different ways they interact with the phone. A really good example for Expedia, for instance, we noticed that the calendar functionality in our mobile app wasn't intuitive for people in the Japanese point of sale, and we couldn't figure out why the drop-off was so intense. So then we did some user testing, and we understood that the way they interact with the phone is a little different than in the U.S., where in the U.S. we're all thumbs, and we tap and we drag and we use gestures, and we kind of designed for that. So you would tap with your thumb and you would drag for check-in and check-out date or flight arrival and departure. So it made sense to us because that's how we interact with the device. But in Japan, and even here too, I've noticed, like, everybody has these massive phones, and well, I do too now, actually. I'm in that boat, but I'm still figuring out how to go from thumb to pointer finger, because you hold it in one hand and then you tap. I'm not sure if that's because there are more apps that are not native, like so you can build apps that are kind of cross-platform using Unity or JavaScript, and a lot of those don't support gestures. But the basic idea is like the interaction with the form factor was completely different depending on the region. So once we understood that, we were able to design around it and make it more intuitive for the Japanese point of sale. That's just one very, very specific example, but some people, like, you have to understand what culture you're building for, and the wording is hugely important. What images you display are really important. Some people, we've noticed some cultures respond better to like or like beautiful nature imagery, and some respond better to human-centric imagery. So yes, the adaptation, like absolutely. And the bigger the product reach is, the more that you need to understand that, which ties into the teams in the global aspect. So we have teams kind of scattered strategically throughout the world, and we actually have one in Singapore. We have a joint venture with AirAsia Go. So we just launched the AirAsia Go app like last week, I think. And I think it's number 3 in the App Store right now or something. So we're pretty excited about it. It's not in every point of sale in Asia, but it's in a few of them. So we do have points of specific teams that can be in the ground and convey that information to us on the product side. But being able, from a product perspective, understand always that the greater your reach is, the more tailored you need to be capable of. And that also ties into like regulations and legal implications and taxes and things like that. Could you use the mic real quick? It's right behind you.
Sorry. When you say strategically located, what do you mean by that? And how do you actually choose those locations?
Okay. What do we mean by that? So at a certain level, we watch where people use our app, and we watch when momentum starts to pick up. So it started years ago, but we started to notice that Expedia, we could be stronger in the Asian markets. So from the strategy perspective, we went out and we created a joint venture with AirAsia for the mobile component for AirAsia Go, and that was the beginning of our attempt to reach into this area. And it's really cool actually to be here because I still haven't been to the Singapore office, but thinking of it as the first, like, we want to get into these different markets, and we watched the momentum. We watched people asking for it in the comments, and when we would speak to people, we would understand that the brand awareness wasn't strong enough. So we would know that we need to have a marketing team focused on that region specifically. So if you're asking like where in terms of what city, that really depends on the economies and what we want to focus on. But I guess bigger cities would help. But it really depends on the goals of the leadership team of the company itself and what they're trying to accomplish specifically. Cool. Hey.
Hi. In the travel app space, is there already an app, for example, if the app user travels from Kuala Lumpur to New York? So when he touches down, it already pushes the information such as currency exchange rate, weather conditions, and traffic conditions to the application so that the app user will feel engaged. For example, this app is able to know from this point to this point and what are important information that pushes to him that he is able to relate to.
So what's your question?
Is there already an app?
Can you go from one region to the next for specific data? Is that what you're wondering?
Is there already an app serving this purpose and pushing data to customers?
Oh, there are tons of apps that go from region to region. Like, so you mentioned weather. There's the iOS weather app that shows you the location or the weather in specific cities. It all depends on what kind of data you want to show. So if you want your app to show traffic and weather and trending Twitter hashtags or anything, it all you need to once you identify what data you want to pull in, you need to find providers of that data. So if it's not you, then you need to find APIs, like partnerships for integrating that information, like third party. For travel, for Expedia, it would be useful to show weather, for instance, in the city that you're going to. We don't do that right now in the Expedia app, but we do in our Flight Track app, which is another property, like an app that we own. So it depends on what type of information you have identified that is valuable to pull in, whether it's weather or airport data, like airport maps, specific directions within airports, or anything like that. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, right, yeah. Hey.
Okay, I see Expedia's app is actually a single app, but they are like some of the apps is actually like TripAdvisor. They are having multiple apps that across different cities. So what is your advice and why Expedia is actually positioned as a single app rather than multiple apps across different regions?
So Travelocity has different apps depending on what region?
Yeah, TripAdvisor, they are having city guides across multiple cities. They actually go by region.
Oh, okay.
Multiple apps and versus a single app across
Yeah.
all regions.
Yeah, so that is an example of two different product strategies. Just deciding the more you fragment your brand, so TripAdvisor has all these different apps and Expedia has one. We keep it as one as of right now because we want all of our marketing and all of our brand awareness to go to one identity. On the technical side, if everything has been built to is completely dependent on other aspects, you might not be able to fragment it. TripAdvisor's city-specific ones, now I can't really speak to them, but it would make sense to have a specific city guide for one city if you're going to that city and you go and you download that app. So you search for Kuala Lumpur City or you search for New York City and you see TripAdvisor New York City app and you're like, oh, perfect, that's exactly what I want. I don't need the whole rest of the world, I need New York. So there are a few different considerations. There are a lot of different considerations that you need to think about, but it's an example of just two different product strategies, two different go-to market strategies, if you will. And it doesn't necessarily mean one's better than the other. So that's actually a really good question because Foursquare, for instance, just broke up their app from one where you would check in and view your venue data, view your tips, all in one thing. They broke it up into Swarm and then Foursquare. Whether or not that was the right decision, time will tell, and we don't know the considerations that went into that decision, because that's all leadership and that was all internal decision, obviously. But the fact is, they broke the functionality into two different things. And their reasoning was good. They wanted to have the single-use check-in and show people where their friends were. And then they wanted the venue data that would address more of the Yelp market. But with that became that fragmentation might hurt them because now if you want to check in and you're a longtime Foursquare user, you might be used to opening the Foursquare app and then all of a sudden you have to open Swarm. Or the marketing aspect. Now they have to spend marketing money on two different apps rather than just one.
Actually, this is a question based on like our previous discussion, saying that your product has to be tailored to like a specific user based on countries or segment, and like given that you guys are building one app, so like have you come across like a conflicting case based on different user habits of different countries, and how do you resolve that?
Oh, interesting. Like, so you're considering going into a new market, and then the use case or the user habits are just completely different from
Right.
from what
right,
you
right,
have
right. The
existing.
Japanese and like
Yeah.
you guys doing
Uh,
different things.
That's a really good question. Hopefully, I mean, if you're going into a market, you would think that you're addressing a problem that they have as well. And if it's completely different, then you might you might need to kind of rethink whether or not it's a good idea to go into that market. Usually with regional considerations, the use cases may vary a little bit, but I would be surprised if there were super conflicting use cases. If they're big enough, then it would make sense either to change the app specifically for that point of sale or for that country, which would kind of require a separate app to be launched, and that would be a pretty big decision to make, I think. So if you do notice that, I would check your assumptions and check your reasoning for going into that market. If it's so different that all of a sudden everything like is just exploding, or you can see it exploding. Okay, I think we have time for one more.
Hi, I'm Alvin here. So one question is, Expedia started out from a small company, grown into a big global one. So do you have like any tips or any guide in terms of, based on all the loops that we're gonna do, it's all internally. So what are the external marketing stuff that you can facilitate the global growth of the app itself?
So Expedia is an interesting use case or case study in that we were spun off from Microsoft, and we were kind of immediately a big company. The vision of Expedia was to be a worldwide entity for online travel agents. So with that vision came a huge paycheck and a huge company pretty much immediately. I wasn't around for that. I bet it was really interesting. Having said that, though, I think they started. Actually, I can't really speak to how Expedia handled it initially, but you need to tackle. It's better to go deep and get penetration in one market before you go before you are completely just open to everybody. So with Facebook, for instance, they went from college to college, and they were hindered by a few things. One of which was like just server costs, which is really interesting. Like it was $85 for them to get a new server, and they would get a new server when they had the money, and then they would go to a new school. So that limiting factor really helped them because they were able to make sure that the technology was scaling as it needed to across every school. And there was a lot of work in the beginning for them, and a lot of manual components that had to be done for each school. So being able to scale as needed is like you need to just make sure before you open it up to everything that you can handle it on the back end.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Cool. So I'd love to talk to any of you guys more in depth, one-on-one. And I'm going to be here holding office hours. Feel free to get in touch. And if you want to get in touch with me digitally, this is all my contact information. I live in San Francisco. It's awesome to be here. I love hanging out with you guys and talking about what your ideas are and try to help you work on any type of product management questions, any app questions. design focus, any of these loops. We went through a lot the past 2 days, so please feel free to get in touch. That's my personal email address, all my social information, all right there. So this was awesome, so I hope you guys got some value out of it. Thanks to you very much, yeah.